Hey there. So this video is not going to be about me working inside of Painter, but me rather having a discussion about where to go next. And I do that by taking a step back, making some renders, and evaluating the overall look, and then refining from then on. Now, you might notice that the model looks a little bit different than it did before, and that's because whenever it gets kind of loud in the house, I can't really record it because it would be annoying to the audience, but it doesn't mean that I have to stop working, so I keep working. And again, overnight, I made a few renders after finishing the last video, and I wanted to evaluate where it is that I could go next. So let's take a look at the videos. So after making these renders, I noticed a few things right away. And that is, some of the reflections, roughness levels rather, did not necessarily match what I had in Painter. Now that could be a sampling issue, right? So maybe the reflection is downsized or downscaled, whatever. And then that portion of the model is then reflected. So it's definitely looking a lot sharper inside of Redshift. So I'm going to have to change that by maybe perhaps going inside of Redshift and adding a node to up the roughness values. So maybe I'll do that over there. And then as I go through the sequence, you'll notice here, for example, that the edges on this object, yeah, sure, they're worn, right, and some of the paint has come off, but there's no actual damage to the model itself. I mean, usually when you have something being dinged up, you'll have that surface receiving some kind of scratch, some kind of dent, and then as a result of being scratched up and damaged, you would have paint actually coming off. And here I'm just getting the paint coming off, and in a very uniform fashion, so it's a perfect line. But there's only so much that the renderer, or rather Painter, can do on its own, because right now it's taking the model information and it calculated the convexity and then automatically applied that to take off the paint. But in my case, I want this to be a little bit more organic in that it would be more dinged up in some spots and less in others. And there might have to be some manual labor in there as well. So you take a look at this, and again, you notice how sharp some of the reflections are, so I'm going to have to take care of that. Now, the reflection roughness overall, I first started to notice that it's really bad when I got to the underneath part of the model. You start noticing that there's patches of that are rough here and here and here. But then there's areas that are so shiny and polished that it just wouldn't make any sense. So yeah, sure, there's dirt accumulation, but at the same time, due to this thing being exposed to all sorts of weather conditions, there would be always some kind of residue or something that would accumulate on this model, and maybe somebody might clean it and use a brush or something like that, and so there might be scratches that would then sure make the model look a little bit more polished, but it would be very faint and not in large chunks like this. At the same time, when mechanics maintain, whatever, like the machinery that they're maintaining, they're usually dirty. I mean, due to the fact that they're handling things with oils, I mean, they're lubricating things and whatnot. And so, as they're handling things, there's usually going to be some kind of oil residue that's going to be left over after the fact. And maybe somebody might want to also maintain, the machinery by cleaning it as well. And so they might use some kind of scrubber, some kind of wire brush, or any kind of brush to like while they're washing, to clean up certain parts. But there's also going to be certain parts that are going to be less accessible. So, for example, in here, there might have to be some dirt accumulation in here because it's a little bit harder to wash unless you completely take it apart. And usually, nobody's really going to be taking something apart completely whenever we're maintaining it. So again, around here, I might want to get a little bit of dirt accumulation, maybe some oils and things like that, but maybe this wider exposed area might get some oil on it, but then it would be completely scratched up and very faint due to the fact that it might have actually gotten cleaned. So those are some of the things that you have to consider, is how damage would happen, and how dirt would accumulate, how somebody might clean it, what kind of environment it's in, right? So maybe you're going to get some rain streaks on here that might be, those kind of like very dry residue that you get from rain. You'll usually notice it on a car, for example, like a few days after. Especially if you've been around things like a construction site, you might get some dirt stuck on your car, and then rain would sort of wash it off, but then it would leave these streaks where there's parts where the dirt kind of slides down the surface, but then that dirt accumulates and starts getting a little thicker, and it gives it some kind of interest, right? So again, think about what it is that you want, like what kind of environment it's in, who handles it, how things are cleaned, how things are damaged, which parts are exposed and which parts are actually less prone to getting damaged, right? So maybe there's an area in here that is less prone to get damaged, so maybe some of this curvature behind here might not receive any damage at all, so remove it from there, right? And this is going to give your model a lot more of an organic feel, even though again, this is a piece of machinery, but it's going to give it a more lively, more authentic look. Maybe there's going to be some decals, right? This way up, that kind of thing, right? Or watch your fingers. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as this video goes, and then let's look at the next renders. So by this time of making this render, I've taken care of a few details. Right away you'll notice that the reflection here is not as sharp as it used to be. I've also changed the material because I didn't want too many colors in this model. I think the orange, the white, and a little bit of black and silver is enough. I really don't want to have too many colors in here. So adding yet another one like copper, for example, and having it take quite a significant portion of the model would be a bit of a distraction. So I roughened up the model and I've added some damage. As you can see here, there's some streaks here, and then I've gone and added some damage across here. There's these scratches also here. And again, I've refined it so that the overall damage wouldn't be uniform. So as you can see, there's scratches here, but then maybe less here where it's a little bit more tucked away. What else did I do here? Well, first of all, you'll notice that there's a bit more randomization as far as the paint coming off. I don't like this yet, but I'll keep working on that portion. I didn't get to everything I wanted to by the time I got to this render, but there's a few things that I've taken care of for sure. And one of them being is, if you look at this object, again, there's a less uniform way of chipping away, and there's also some scratches around. Like for example, there's a little micro scratch here. The edges are not uniform anymore, but you'll notice it mostly on this object here. And so if I go below, there's some dirt accumulation, and again, like you'll notice there's like little chips and dirt, and then there's this where there might be some residue from old oil while this object was being handled, and then maybe it was cleaned. Now I kind of want to remove some of this patch, but again, there's some parts that have been cleaned, and I've actually removed some of the oil stains. And as I was saying earlier, that maybe this part, during the handling part, might actually be damaged. So I've added some scratches along here and some dirt accumulation and things like that. At the same time, I've worked on the glass elements. So if I go back to the top, you'll notice that there is some glass elements here now. And right around the edges, there's a very non-uniform look to them. And what I mean by that is that the edges of the glass are actually a little bit more opaque due to them getting a little bit more dirt. And so every single one of these panels would only be really washed right on the overall surface, but maybe a little bit less on the edges. So I've done that. So over the next few videos, we'll be tackling some of that, where we're going to be adding more variety to the surfaces. and fixing up some of the issues that we've discussed and working on the glass and things like that. Let me go over to the next render. So when we take a look at this model closer up, and then stopping here because that's as far as I got with the render, you'll notice a few things. One, the glass itself, it's not only being worn or only around the edges, but there's also some splotches here. So it actually affects the roughness and opacity right around the, not only around the edges, but beyond that as well. And every single one of these glass pieces is different, which gives it a more organic look. But then you'll also look at some of the damage that I've mentioned earlier, but now that you see it close up, you'll see some scratches and things like that. You'll notice that this damage actually extends to some parts a little bit more than others. Like here, for example, it's relatively clean. This edge here is very, very fine, but then there's a scratch. And then there's some damage here in this portion. And of course, as it gets tucked away underneath this steel portion, there's less damage there because, again, it's not an exposed part. This steel object is rough around here due to the fact that it's actually hiding underneath this cover. So I've used the ambient occlusion to increase or multiply the dirt. And I've also added some little speckles of damage to the steel, just as it would be kind of dinged up, but due to the fact that it's such a dense material, it wouldn't actually crack as easily. So it's just got these like micro dents and maybe some air bubbles when it was originally formed. So that's pretty much what I've done. Ooh, and there's also these micro bumps on these hoses. So over the next few videos, what I want to do is I want to now recreate some of this work that I've done here. So we will be working on some of these steel elements, again, giving it a more human touch, and at the same time working on the glass and then rendering it within Houdini. So I'll be going over that and then also discussing the discrepancy between the Redshift and Painter, and yeah, and then just furthering the model. So see you next time.